Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we're releasing a special episode from a project that I undertook in 2022 called the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. My intention was to take all of the best clips from our show about one particular topic and put them together as a masterclass to be released behind a paywall and with a subscription-based service on Patreon. Well, we didn't have many subscribers, so I'm breaking up these episodes and releasing them here for free so that they can make an impact and hopefully help some people out there. Today's episode was taken from the first series, all about the 3 macronutrients. This is part 2 from the second episode, all about carbohydrates. We always appreciate any feedback you might have, so feel free to leave us a comment on YouTube or on our website at myboundlessbody.com, where you can always book a complimentary 30-minute session with us at any time. Cheers and enjoy the second part of this 2-part conversation about carbohydrates.
Now, also, I think an important thing for people to realize is the term vegetable oil is one of the biggest scams in modern consumer history.
Thank you.
With the exception, perhaps, of things like avocado oil or olive oil, that's not vegetable oil at all. When you walk down the aisle at Walmart, I actually did a video about this one time where I filmed this, like, I don't know what it was, like 25 feet of a 7-high-foot rack filled with stuff saying vegetable oil on the label. Okay, and not a drop of it is from vegetables. It is oil industrially removed from nuts and seeds and grains.
It's really such an interesting way of looking at things. I really love Dave's perspective. And in the book, he really hammers home the point that if we don't continue feeding ourselves with tons and tons of processed foods and carbohydrates, the medical system, the food system, the pharmaceutical system would lose literally trillions and trillions of dollars. They need to keep this lie going, and they need to keep us on that system of glucosis, of running on carbohydrate all the time so that they can keep their profit margins high. It's really sad, and we so appreciate him and his work. We're now going to go back to Amy Berger, but this was back in episode 47, one of our very first ones, and we're going to let her do what she does best, which is clarify confusion around carbohydrates.
Yeah, this the book that I co-wrote with Dr. Eric Westman, who actually trained directly with Dr. Atkins back in the day. It's called End Your Carb Confusion, and it is the book that I would want if I was new. This is the simplest, most down-to-earth, plain English guide as to why to do low carb, how to do it, who should do it. I mean, frankly, not everybody needs a low carb diet, but and it's funny you were saying, talking about all the meal prep and all this advanced stuff and the tracking, and our book is like the opposite of that. We make it very clear that you can do this on any budget. You can, if you want to buy all grass-fed, pasture-raised meats, that's great. If you can't afford it, if all you can afford is that tube of ground beef that they sell at the discount store, that's great too. And you could even, if you don't cook at all, you can actually be perfectly successful, dining out or getting takeout or even fast food for every meal, as long as you know what to order. And so in terms of getting started, the number one most important thing, and the thing that actually makes this way of eating effective, the thing that makes all of these fundamental primary changes inside you, is keeping your carbohydrate intake really low. Everything else is secondary. People worry about, should I have MCT oil? Should I fast? Should I do this? Should I do that? What about putting butter in my coffee? All of that is meaningless unless you're doing the single most important thing that actually makes this way of eating work, and that's just keeping your carb intake really low.
Is that why you called the book End Your Carbohydrate Confusion rather than calling it just keto something? I've heard you answer this question before, and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, we purposely kept the word keto out of the title because our book is not just a keto book. Our book has 3 different phases of carbohydrate intake because not everybody needs a strict keto diet. And we actually have a checklist that depending on your answers to the questions, it points you to a level of carbohydrate intake that's appropriate for you. And of course, many, many millions of people really will do best at the ketogenic level, at least to start. But what we try to do throughout the book is end the confusion. Why do so many people have such problems when they eat too much carbohydrate? Why do other people not? Why do we all have friends and family members that can eat tons of fruit and pasta and bread and they're fine and we can't? And we talk about why to keep these things to a minimum in your diet. What happens in your body when you eat too many of these things, and what happens when you start cutting them out of your diet? And besides clearing up that confusion, why can some people eat more carbs and others can't? The main goal of the book is to clear up confusion about how to do this way of eating and how to basically make it your life, make it not your obsessive, but make it the way you eat for life. Make it, it's not a diet. It's not a thing you go on for 6 months and you lose weight and you go back. It's how do you do this for the long term? And that's why besides just the keto portion, there's these other levels of higher carb intake where you might be in a situation where your health is so severely compromised or you're looking to lose so much weight that the strictest approach is best for you. Maybe you're looking to lose 100 pounds or more, or you have diabetes or something. And so being really strict is probably best. But what happens when you get closer and closer and reach your goal? Okay, you've lost the weight, all the medical problems you had are gone, you're off the medication. Now what? Do you need to keep eating super strict keto for the rest of your life? Or might you have room to have a sweet potato or to go to your favorite Mexican place and have the rice and beans? And so we try to kind of answer all those questions, and we try to do it in a way that is entirely scientifically sound, but it's plain English. It's readable. You don't need a PhD to understand it. And yeah.
One thing that I think is really interesting that a lot of people assume is that we sit here and say that carbohydrates are bad. What are we really trying to tell people when we're asking them or suggesting to them that they could have success on a low carbohydrate diet? Are carbohydrates themselves bad?
Right. So in our book, we go out of our way to not demonize anything, except we do kind of point a finger at sugar, at like refined sugar, but fruit, we say in the book something to the effect of, it frankly would be stupid and false of us to say that cantaloupe causes diabetes or that people became obese because they ate too many lentils. These are carbohydrate rich foods that healthy, lean, robust people have eaten for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so to say that these foods have caused, issues that have only really exploded in incidence over the past, let's say 50 or 60 years, that's clearly not the case. There's something else going on. But that being said, for when you already have a health condition that makes you intolerant to these foods, then those foods are maybe best avoided, at least for some period of time. So even if, sweet potatoes and apples and chickpeas didn't cause your issue, you might need to cut way back on them or eliminate them to reverse the issue. It's kind of a hard distinction to make sense of, but we don't really demonize the carbohydrate. But frankly, if you are living with a medical issue that is caused by or made worse by chronically high blood sugar or insulin, then you need to stop eating foods that massively raise your blood sugar and insulin. I mean, that's pretty basic stuff there, you would think. And I guess what surprises a lot of people is that they don't realize just how many health problems fall into that category. We're not just talking about type 2 diabetes here when we talk about blood sugar or insulin. PCOS, gout, hypertension, erectile dysfunction, BPH, enlarged prostate, fatty liver, like the list is endless. And even if you are at a quote unquote normal weight, and I hate that phrase because I don't know what a normal weight is, but even if you're not overweight and even if you don't have diabetes, you might still have any number of these issues because there's other factors going on.
You talk about this a lot, and we've had Dr. Ben Bickman on the show, and he helped us kind of understand this a little bit better too. But I really think there's so much confusion about this that I'd really like you to highlight the difference between blood sugar and insulin. Because I still have people throwing those two terms around like they're the same thing. And they're absolutely not. And people are so confused by this. So tell us, from the carbohydrate to the blood sugar to the insulin, how are all those things different but related?
Yeah. Oh man, I love Dr. Bickman. So it's your audience got a real treat with him.
He's the best. He's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when we eat foods that are high in carbohydrate, now, I guess before I even say any of this, we have to make it clear that everybody's different. Everybody's body responds differently to different foods. You and I could eat the exact same amount of the exact same food, and one of us will have a massive rise in blood sugar and one of us won't. It's really, there's so much individual variation to this. It's why I actually don't like the glycemic index, because a food could be low glycemic to you and very high glycemic to me, right? Meaning it would raise my blood sugar a lot and it would barely budge yours. But with that in mind, when we eat foods, primarily foods that are high in carbs, it raises our blood sugar, and rising blood sugar signals the pancreas to send out insulin, because insulin helps to get blood sugar to get glucose into your cells and out of the bloodstream. Except that's only one of many, many other jobs that insulin has. I don't want to get too kind of deep in the weeds, but I guess what I can say is some people, not some, many people can have chronically high insulin even if their blood sugar is normal. And it's actually the blood sugar is being kept normal by the very high insulin. And so if they go to the doctor and they get their fasting blood sugar checked, or even their hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of that longer term average measurement, those could be perfectly normal. And yet this person has a lot of unexplained, weird, sort of nagging health issues. And the doctor doesn't really understand what's going on because the person is at a normal weight and their blood sugar is normal. But if they would only test insulin, they would see that this insulin is sky high. And it's just a huge factor that's being completely missed so much today. I mean, it's more and more doctors are starting to understand this, but it's still a really small fraction of the whole medical system right now.
That was very well explained and relatively simple to understand. I think it's so important. So now this is starting to seem like a supply problem. You're talking about cantaloupes and lentils and things like that. You don't see a lot of those on the land, at least where I am. And you also talked about refined sugar, which now we find everywhere. You can eat any of that stuff all day, every day for the rest of your life. That seems to be where the problem is with the carbohydrates, is not necessarily that we respond one way to them or another, but that they're just ubiquitously everywhere. You can't get away from them hardly.
That's a really good point because, evolutionarily, we would have, depending on where you lived in the world, depending on the latitude, you would have maybe had a lot of fruit and a lot of sweet things in the summertime, and then they would have not been available again for another several months. So you would have gone some period of every year kind of eating higher carb foods and fattening up, and then you would have been unfattening and you would have been on a much lower carb diet depending on the season. The modern food supply has robbed us of that seasonality. You can live in I don't know if there's a Whole Foods in North Dakota, but let's just assume there is. You could go to a Whole Foods in North Dakota in January and buy mangoes and bananas. So it's I think you hit it on the head when you said it's really just the ubiquity. And, there's a lot of people that get very neurotic and very religious minded when it comes to low carb and keto. And every year when it's Thanksgiving and Christmas and the holidays or Halloween, they just go, oh my goodness, like my kids, they can't have the candy and this is a disaster. When the fact is, if we only really ever really gorged ourselves on sugar and starch and sweet things at Halloween, at Christmas, on our birthday, a couple of times a year, it would be no problem. The problem is that we eat like it's Thanksgiving every single day. It's nonstop. I mean, before I went low carb, I lived on carbohydrate. It's a miracle I have any pancreatic function left whatsoever. I'm from New York City. I would have a bagel the size of my head every morning with a glass of juice. 3 hours later, I was starving, so I'd probably have a granola bar. Lunch would be, a sandwich with chips. I'm snacking on pretzels midday. Dinner is pasta. It's just a nonstop infusion of sugar and starch all day, every day. It's not having an occasional piece of fruit once in a while that's making anybody sick.
You guys made such a good point on that note too, by talking about the holiday. I think that is very well said and easy to remember. Like if you're going to have a holiday, that's not a hollow week or a hollow 40 years lifetime of eating way too many carbohydrates.
Exactly. That's a Dr. Westmanism. So I give him credit for that. He is an internal medicine doctor, so he sees patients, and even knowing what he knows about how important it is to eat this way, he'll tell his patients, look, Christmas is coming up or it's Valentine's Day, have whatever you want, but don't let the holiday turn into a hollow week or a hollow month.
So Amy just referenced Dr. Eric Westman, who wrote the book End Your Carb Confusion with Amy. And so let's cut over to him. We also hosted him on our show back in episode 51. So we're going to hear from Dr. Eric Westman now. What were some of the areas where people got the most confused? Because you are right, there's an endless amount of ways to be confused about carbohydrates, but really it's not that hard. But what are some of the more common ones that you guys tried to address?
Yeah, we, at the same time this book launched, we launched an online digital class called the Keto Made Simple Masterclass. It's available at adaptyourlifeacademy.com. And the reason I bring that up is we surveyed the first 600 people that went through the Keto Made Simple Masterclass. And we asked them what they learned and what kind of mistakes they thought they were making. And it really fell into several categories. One was the overconsumption of fat. So that in today's teaching of a keto diet, there's a common mistake of adding oils and butter and ghee and MCT and thinking that because it has no carbs, you can have as much of it as you want. So on a clinical program like mine, where we've used it for years now in a program, we've learned that you have to put a limitation on the cheese, the cream, the mayonnaise, or it becomes a trigger for a lot of people. They eat too many calories and it doesn't work if you're doing it for weight loss. So that's the first message, was overconsumption of fats. The second message we got from the survey of the class of people learning our method is the use of net carbs versus total carbs. So again, in today's teaching of keto, you might have heard of net carbs, where you subtract the fiber and sugar alcohols. But actually those fiber grams and sugar alcohols can impact the metabolism. So we use total carbs. That's actually what we use in our research studies, what we've basically used since 1863 when Banting first talked about this in London, England. Using total carbs is a more effective approach and it works better. And then you're not falling victim to these new products and pills and oils and drinks, and you want to stay away from that stuff. So the overconsumption of fat and the use of net carbs instead of total carbs were the two main factors that caused confusion, and the confusion led to it not working.
So we are going to go back to Amy now, back to that same episode 47 of Boundless Body Radio, as we're going to start to shift a little bit from the science of carbohydrates now to tips and tricks and things that people have learned along the way so that people can pull this off in a practical and meaningful way. I think it's really nice to cover this topic from all different angles and get tips and tricks from all kinds of different people. So we are going to go back to Amy.
I have to give the warning, if you're on medication for type 2 diabetes, or even type 1, people with type 1 diabetes can do a low carb diet. If you're on medication, especially insulin, and if you're on certain blood pressure medications, you do want to make sure that you have a doctor or some kind of medical professional monitoring you, because this way of eating is so effective and it can start making changes in your body so rapidly that you might need to have your medication adjusted before you start the diet. Like 2 or 3 days later is actually going to be too late. That's how effective, the minute you stop eating foods that raise your blood sugar, you can't really take the same dose of medication that you were taking when you were eating a ton of foods that raised your blood sugar. So that's the one warning we have. Other than that, if I can sort of impart any nugget of wisdom here, this isn't as complicated as people are making it out to be. Just take the starch and sugar out of your diet. If you normally, let's say you were going to go out to breakfast and you have an omelet and it comes with toast and pancakes or, a biscuit, like just get the omelet, get it with the cheese and the vegetable, like that's it. Going any restaurant, I've never been to a restaurant where I couldn't ask to substitute a non-starchy vegetable for something starchy. For example, like at a steakhouse, you get a steak and it comes with the potato and a green vegetable. Ask to just double up on the green vegetables and hold the potato. And it's so, your plate really just needs to be a nice, generous portion of fatty-ish protein and some non-starchy vegetables. It could be pork, it could be chicken, it could be beef, lamb, bison, fish, whatever you like. It's entirely customizable. If you are kosher or halal and you don't want to eat pork and shellfish, don't eat pork and shellfish. If you are allergic to certain things, you can make this diet entirely your own. All you have to do is keep the sugar and starch out of it. And there's so much that you can eat that I recommend that too. Focus on all the things that you can eat and not the things you're getting rid of.
I love that. One of my favorite questions to ask somebody when we're first meeting and doing our initial consultation as they're asking for a plan is I will ask them, would you like this to be simple or would you like this to be complicated? And everybody says the same thing. They go, oh my God, my life is so busy already. This has to be the most simple thing ever, or I'm not going to do it. And I'd say, great. Then what you should do is when you're hungry, try to eat as much kind of salty, fatty meat as you possibly can. I would kind of focus on red meat, get everything else out as best you can. If you like vegetables, go ahead and do that. And that's about it. And then I'll be quiet. And they'll look at me and they'll go, oh. And they'll wait a second. And then they'll go, well, how many meals should I eat? I go, I don't know. Just when you're hungry, eat those things. Oh, what about this supplement, such and such fat burner? I'm like, okay, well, you're making things a little bit more complicated. I thought you said you wanted simple. You can do that if you want. Well, what about this exercise program and this meal plan? It's like, you just told me you wanted to do this simple. Like, it doesn't have to be that complicated.
I could not agree more. I mean, that's why we wrote this book, because when you get the diet right, you don't need anything else. And I hate, I help people in whatever way they need to be helped if I'm able to, but I dread when people ask me, well, how many calories should I have? Or how many grams of this? And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. The beauty of keto is that you shouldn't have to worry about the numbers and the math and tracking and the spreadsheets. Now, if you like that, some people are just data geeks. They want to see the numbers. Great. I'm not. I'm never. The day that I have to pull out an app or a spreadsheet when I sit down at the dinner table, just put me out of my misery. Just take me out to the pasture and shoot me. I just love food too much to turn it into a calculus problem. And I agree with what you said. When you're new, just eat. When you're hungry, eat as much of XYZ foods and don't worry about the rest. And that's when most of the people who come to me are actually already doing this and they're just not getting the results they want. So we have to troubleshoot and tweak. But when I get somebody who's brand new, I tell them, I don't want you to worry at all about how much you're eating or how many times a day you're eating. I don't care how much you eat. Just stick to this list. As long as you only eat foods that are on this list, you eat as much as you want, as often as you want. Let's just let your body get adjusted to this new metabolic state. Let's just worry about getting used to not eating any carbs. And then if we're not happy with how weight loss is going or whatever issue you're trying to resolve, then we can look if maybe we have to, change your numbers a little bit. But I just really, truly, the beauty of this is that you shouldn't have to micromanage all those details.
I am so excited to share this next clip with you. This is Dr. Phil Maffetone, who we also hosted on our show. This is a little bit of a different nuance, and I wanted to include this because I think a lot of people, when they think of carbohydrates, they will also relate them to sports and sports nutrition, in particular with endurance sport. Now, Dr. Phil Maffetone is absolutely just a pioneer when it comes to cardio and cardiovascular fitness. He pioneered the maximum aerobic fitness way of measuring intensity by using heart rate, which is basically taking a basic formula of 180 minus your age and training at that specific heart rate to maximize fat burning and efficiency. And so in the beginning, this is not necessarily going to be talking about carbohydrates. It's not going to be talking about carbohydrate intake, although we will shift the conversation in that direction. But I do think this is very much relevant because of that association of, like I said, you think you're going to go on a bike ride, you think you're going to go a run. Where are the Gatorades and the goos and the gels and all those things that we traditionally feed ourselves with? So we're going to be talking about energy burning in this first part of this clip, and then in the second part we will cover diet as well.
People who are healthier burn more fat than sugar, whether it's resting or during a workout. But the bottom line here is that people do get better. What that means is they lose body fat, their various measures of health improve, and they get faster at the same heart rate. And sometimes we go through all the numbers and we talk about the metabolic changes that occur, the physiology of all this, all the stuff that is really exciting for you and me. And sometimes we forget to say to the athlete, oh yeah, by the way, you're also going to get faster at the same heart rate. And that's so it's basically, okay, the idea of training fast or race fast goes out the window, because what we're saying is we want you to train slow to get fast.
Yep, totally.
And they have to scratch their head on that. And really the only way they're truly convinced of it is when it actually happens to them.
It's so interesting too. Like I noticed that it would work for pretty much everybody across the board. Like you could be 400 pounds or you could be a world-class athlete. And I just noticed that like those rules still apply. There may be some differences, but yeah, we want to see that your efficiency is coming up. We want to see that there's an increase in the amount of fat that your body is burning, which it stores very effectively. You have a lot of it. Most people want less of it to begin with. And what we would do is if we ran the same protocol the second time, we would be able to see every single heartbeat and the efficiency and how much fat they were burning, but also what is the workload, which you're right. Like that's what people care about. They want to be able to win races because they're going faster. And we would show people, look, here's, you did a 3-month training block. You were running at 140 beats per minute and your workload was 5.5 miles an hour. Well, now it's 6.1 at exactly the same heart rate. And you're burning more fat.
Yeah. Yeah. And likewise for cyclists, their power goes up. Rowing on a rowing machine, you'll see the power go up at the same heart rate. It's all the same. It's all the same thing. And then they often go from complaining that they're training too slow to now complaining that they have to run too fast at the same heart rate, which is interesting.
Yeah.
but it's in the very beginning for me, and I started seeing athletes. I entered practice in the running boom era, and really people in the very beginning came to see me because they were injured. And I realized that the only way I could really take care of them was to find out what they're actually doing in training. And then I realized that, it was the cause of their injury, not because runner's knee is a genetic problem. So, but the very beginning, my whole thought process about heart rate was about fat burning, but it was to help people who needed to lose weight. And it didn't take long for me to realize that, in fact, I had some overweight people who wanted to walk, and they started walking, and then they said they had to walk faster. I said, well, yeah, that's because you're losing weight so you can walk faster. And then I thought, no, that's not why they're walking faster. So I realized that this is great for everybody. And then the application with initially endurance athletes and eventually all kinds of athletes, all the athletes I worked with, which is virtually all sports, it was applicable as well.
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting too, especially with an athlete. I'll say with most anybody who's been conditioned in the, calories in, calories out mentality of, really hard workouts. The pushback I would get would be very interesting. Like I kind of slow people down, put them more their aerobic based kind of heart rates where they're working on efficiency and fat burning. And people would come up to me and complain and be like, this is way too easy. I hate this. What's the point of this? And it's like, okay, well, do you want a hard workout or do you want to burn fat? Those are not necessarily the same two things. And sure enough, if somebody would stick with it, a few weeks, few months, they're losing fat. They feel really good. They're not getting injured. And their endurance just goes up and up and up along with their speed and workloads. And that's, if anybody is listening and has done, a 5K, 10K program and thought you were going to go out and burn all these calories and lose weight and were disappointed that you didn't lose any weight. And in fact, probably gain weight once the event was over. I really would encourage you to change your way of thinking and start to adapt these things. Is that something you've noticed as well?
Oh yeah. I'm going to do this program. I got to lose weight, blah, blah, blah. And they they get through the 5K. They're very happy. Congratulations. But now they weigh more and they're exhausted or they're injured.
Yep.
If they even, got to the starting line, many of them don't make it. Those are the ones I saw in the beginning. And it's really, it's that no pain, no gain thing. Again, and it's interesting that in the last 20 years, the amateur running times have gotten worse and worse.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's some good data, and I can't remember his name, but I always have to look it up. But there's it's just sad to see that, but it's the training part is the one part, and then eating right is the other part, and that's an equally complicated discussion with people as well, because the entirety of sports in our society is based, from a food standpoint, is based on carbohydrates, and it becomes a very difficult thing to have the discussion. It's sort of like, okay, there's a metabolism and we burn both fat and sugar, and you want to burn more fat. Oh, you mean I have to slow down? I have to train slow? Yes. And you have to eat fat and not much carbohydrate.
Yep, that's right. And you were such an early adapter of that way of thinking. It just took me so long to come to that conclusion. But you're right. Like if you're doing any kind of training and you're not eating, enough protein and fat, and you're, doing what I was doing back when I was racing, just dumping gallons of gallons of Cytomax into my body, eating 5-6 times a day. I needed a nap every day. Like if you're doing that, you're not going to increase your fat burning. You have to reduce the amount of carbohydrate and make sure that you're eating enough protein and fat. And if you just do nothing more than just eat real food, you'll probably get there, don't you think?
Man, it's just that simple. I don't know why people want to make it so complicated. Don't eat any junk food and just eat natural food. And you're there. And then depending on your age, you might have to modify some of the natural carbohydrates. But for the most part, it's that simple. And, you have to feed your aerobic system. If you want to maximize aerobic function, you've got to train the aerobic system, and then you've got to feed the aerobic system with the foods that are going to help it, which are proteins and fats. And of course, you don't want to eat the foods that impair aerobic function, that impair fat burning, and that's the carbohydrates, and especially the refined carbohydrates, which is essentially almost all the carbohydrates that people eat. There's the big question of, what are, refined carbohydrates? What is junk food? And I always say, if you have to ask, you're probably eating it. We have become, as a society, so used to looking at packaging and having the words on the package dictate whether that food is healthy or not. And it's really sad that, it's like, I'm going to call the manufacturer and ask him if this is good for me or not. Come on, this is like, it's like calling R.J. Reynolds and asking if smoking is really as bad as they say it is. It's just, and we can't expect our health care system to help us out here. We can't have our insurance companies. We can't have the government, which subsidizes junk food in the U.S. We can't have, we have to learn all this ourselves and take responsibility for feeding our aerobic system. It's really as simple as that.
Well, you have already heard the name Unwin in this premium podcast, and so now we are going to go back to a very special episode that we did back in episode 146 of Boundless Body Radio with a couple that I would consider to be an absolute power couple when it comes to the low carbohydrate world, which is Doctors Jen and David Unwin. These guys are changing so many lives and putting so many people's chronic diseases into remission. They're working over in England and doing such great work, and it was such a high honor to be able to interview both of them at exactly the same time. We're going back to more of these like really practical tips. And so you're going to hear some tips and ways to deal with sugar addiction in particular and how to stay focused and stay on a low carbohydrate diet. What are some things practically that people can do once they, learn that about themselves, that they are, addicted to food, addicted to sugar? What are some things practically that they can start by working on to maybe get some like small wins to build some momentum in the beginning?
Yeah, definitely. So the thing to recognize for people is that see it as an addiction. And that means, of course, that your brain, your sort of reward center in the brain is sort of being hijacked by whatever it is. It's driving you cravings, and it's in the very sort of primitive part of the brain, the part that's really to do with survival and motivation. So you're not going to outthink this problem. You're not going to sit there and think, oh, right, okay, I obviously don't need to eat these things. Because we've all had that experience, haven't we, where you get tired or hungry or emotional, and even though you've said to yourself, I'm not going to eat pie or biscuits or whatever it is today, you kind of watch your disembodied hand reaching for those things, opening the biscuit barrel and eating them, even though you kind of intended not to. And that's because we're driven by these sort of quite primitive parts of the brain that can override our logic. So planning and preparation are really important. So if you want to cut down or cut out the sugars and the starchy foods, the first place to start, and I'm sure you tell your clients this as well, is to clear the house out. Because if it's if it's in the house, you're going to eat it. It's almost certain, that if there was a pot, I mean, peanut butter is one of my problematic foods. If there was a pot of peanut butter in the cupboard, I would end up eating it. So I just had to stop buying it in the end. So clear out your cupboards. If you're living with people who don't all want to do this, just make sure you have your own cupboard or your own space for your food. So when you go and look for food, there's only things there that are on your plan that you want to eat. So I would say planning and preparation and, thinking about the food, having the right food in is actually a really great number one place to start.
And if I could add a couple of pointers as well, it's really important to explain to the people that love you why you are doing this.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they will say, go on, just have a biscuit, or I made this for you. So it's really important to explain to your partner or your mum or your dad or whoever it is, this is really important to me. Please help me achieve this goal. I want to be free of sugar or whatever it is, because you're more likely to succeed if you have a team working with you. And then I've just got my last hint. I've learned this from patients, and I say, well, what went wrong? And what went wrong was there was an emergency and we didn't have any low carb food in. Somebody went to hospital, something happened, and that was, so plan for things going wrong. Have something in your store cupboard that you can eat. So it might be corned beef or a jar of pate or something, and also have it in the car so that there are no circumstances when you can't get to some low carb food that you can eat, because otherwise we all have emergencies in our lives. And as you said yourself, Casey, one pie can be 2 months' pies. So it's worth thinking ahead and make sure in your store cupboard is a tin or something that you can have in that emergency.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd say is, yes, some of it's about the food, isn't it? So getting the food right, planning it, having it in, getting yourself on it, that's step one, isn't it? You can't really move on until you've managed to be abstinent from these things. But really then thinking about, often food has crowded out many other things in people's lives, particularly people who've got, who are have quite a severe problem with this. Their lives have become focused around food, eating, not eating, getting the foods that they want. And they've often started avoiding socializing or avoiding other things that they used to enjoy. So the next phase is definitely putting the things back in your life that are going to give you what food's been giving you. So, because food, we've been using it to get the feel-good transmitters like dopamine and serotonin. And they do boost those things in the short term, but they kind of wreck your brain in the long term, and you're sort of digging a hole. So as you cut down the food, you need to start thinking about what you're putting in your life in its place. Getting outside in the sunshine, taking exercises, any kind of exercise, but walking is perfect. Maybe taking up some hobbies that you've given up. Maybe doing something in a group, or there's all kinds of ideas that people might have, but it's about how you get those feel good neurotransmitters, because you're not going to be getting them in those high doses, if you like, from the food. Obviously you'll get them to some extent from eating, but it's about the whole life plan. It's not just about the food.
I love all of that. Those are all really great, very easy, practical tips that people can remember. Getting support from loved ones. I mean, if any of my loved ones came into my life and said they needed that, I'd be more than happy to support them. I love the always being prepared too. It's so funny. Like, we generally do fasting for most of the day, and our we eat like once a day, and it's normally like in the evening. And we had a flight to Mexico on our first vacation since the pandemic a few weeks ago. And it's like a 5-hour flight. So I didn't really think about food at all. It wasn't going to be a big deal. We could wait until we got to the resort. Well, the plane broke. So we waited at the airport for another 5 or 6 hours before we even boarded the flight, which means we were getting hungry when we were in the air. Yeah. And now there's no options, and we didn't bring anything. And so we were starving, and we would have eaten anything. So I think that's a really important thing to think about.
Yeah. When we fly to America from here, I cook pork belly strips, salt them, and put them in a Tupperware. And we took them on the Atlantic flight, because they're just, the meals are tiny. I'm like, once a day. the meals are minuscule, so they just would drive me mad. Like if you pick the meat out of what you get on an airplane, you've got like a teaspoonful, haven't you, practically? So I always cook some meat and take it along with me. So it is about thinking ahead. And I'm not worrying about looking like a bit of a weirdo, because you're doing it for your own health. You know why you're doing it, and you know it's the right thing for you.
Well, I wish you could travel back a few weeks and teach me that lesson, because that would have been really helpful. I would love to be the weirdo with pork in the plane. That sounds great. We are now going to hear from a cardiologist. I wanted to make sure that we included a cardiologist in this discussion. I think most traditionally trained cardiologists would tell you that fat is bad for you and you need to be on a high carbohydrate diet to avoid heart attacks. But Dr. Brett Scher has found that absolutely the opposite is the case. He does amazing work at Diet Doctor. He's also the host of an amazing podcast by the same name of Diet Doctor, and he is going to give us some practical tips and tricks as well. We also extended this clip a few more minutes so he could include some of his other lifestyle factors that you can do to help improve your life and your health. I thought that was important and a good nuance to add to this conversation. So let's hear from Dr. Brett Scher from episode 75 of Boundless Body Radio. What are a few specific things that people can be doing? I know we mentioned, the diet and exercise, but what specific things would you recommend for somebody who is concerned? Maybe they do have poor metabolic health and they don't want to come see you. They want to have a long and happy life. What things should they be thinking about specifically?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the average person, the average American, or the average person in an industrialized society, we eat too many calories. I mean, that is clear. We eat way too many calories, and too many calories usually coming from carbohydrates or food that combines carbohydrates and fats. And when you look in nature, there actually aren't really any natural foods that are high in both carbohydrates and fats together. And part of the problem is that's what makes up these hyper palatable foods, and that we can just overeat without even thinking about it. They don't hit our satiety mechanisms. In fact, they hit our dopamine receptors instead, that say we want more, we want more, we want more. So number one is getting rid of those. And it sounds so easy to say, but it can be so challenging for people to do. Just like saying reducing calories is so easy to say, but so challenging for people to do. So you have to find a diet that allows you to do that without feeling like you're sacrificing. And for many people, that is a low carbohydrate diet that is relatively high in protein. I mean, 25, 30, 35% of your calories from protein is now considered a high protein diet, which is a little ridiculous because it's actually what our ancestors and most hunter-gatherer societies most likely ate. So it's most likely the appropriate protein diet rather than a high protein diet. So if you could have a protein diet that's around 30% with natural sources of protein, keep your carbs relatively low, and that could be 100 grams for some people, it could be 50 grams for some people, and fill the rest with sort of natural fats to help with taste and enjoyment. That's the way that most people would benefit from eating. And if you can do that in a way where you're eating, spaced out, maybe 2 big meals with one, or 2, moderate meals with one snack, having at least 12 hours between 2 of your meals. If you can get that to 14 or 16 hours, probably a little bit better. But of course, doing that as long as you're not stimulating hunger and craving and binging. So it's finding that sweet spot for the diet that hits all those parameters for you. And then making sure you're physically active. That doesn't mean, doing 30 minutes on a treadmill and then sitting on your rump all day long. But staying active, going for walks, getting outside, having active hobbies, doing some resistance training. Those are some of the biggest pillars that are going to help you improve your health. Then a lot of, diet and exercise get the majority of the attention because that's where a lot of the benefits are going to come from, but making sure you're prioritizing your sleep. We also live in an environment that, people brag about not needing much sleep or not getting much sleep. And we watch, movies and videos on our computer and then turn off the computer and expect to fall right asleep. And instead we're up for 2 hours and we have poor quality sleep. Well, that has a lot to do with it too. So good sleep hygiene, staying away from the screens before sleep, or at least at the minimum using some blue blocking glasses, although I think those can help, but much better is just staying off of tech before sleep, making sure your room is dark and cool and quiet, all those things that sound like lip service, but actually do make a big difference when you commit to it and when you prioritize it. And the same for stress management. We can't make stress go away, but we can change how our bodies react to it. So that is beneficial to prioritize that as well.
We are now going to be hearing two brief clips from Aranda Wickramasinghe, who actually does work with the Unwins, who we heard from earlier. We're going to hear two different clips. The first one has an analogy of what it was like for Aranda to get off of carbohydrates and how that related to his hunger. I thought this was really valid and important to include. I think so many people think of hunger as just this difficult thing, and they feel hangry and you need to eat immediately. And I love the way he compared his hunger before and after transitioning to a low carbohydrate diet. We're going to skip ahead after that to a part further on in the conversation, but let's hear now that analogy from Aranda Wickramasinghe. Most people, they're seeking a goal of weight loss, fat loss, something along those lines, but they also notice surprising other things along the way. Did you experience any other improvements on things that you weren't expecting?
Absolutely. Yeah. The main thing is hunger. And also mental clarity, because it was really, really strange to me that my hunger, which used to be, I think Eve Mayer describes it as the hunger bully. It used to be kind of like somebody shouting, somebody kind of bullying me and saying, you have to eat, you must eat. So I used to get that kind of almost shaking with hunger kind of feeling. Whereas when I switched to low carb and intermittent fasting, once my body had gone through some adaptation, I was finding that I had the regular kind of ghrelin cycle during the day, but when the hunger came, I could just kind of carry on. I could still focus. And the mental clarity thing, that's pretty awesome, because I did some extended fasts. So in the first 10 to 12 weeks, I did quite a few extended fasts, and I just felt so much at peace. I mean, when you're in deep ketosis, it's a difficult feeling to describe, because it almost seems impossible. Because, for example, 3 days into a fast, I'd be feeling full of energy and I could think clearly. I could do my job. I could go for a walk and do all of the things I normally did, and I could do them better.
Wow. I want to unpack both of those things. You were recently featured on the Big Middle podcast with one of my really good friends, Susan Flory. I love her and I love her work. For the listener, go check out her podcast, The Big Middle. They tackle some great issues and have really great guests, including yourself. You gave one of the best analogies I've ever heard about hunger changing, how the hunger changed for you and how you looked at it. Can you share that analogy that you shared with her?
Yeah, and big thank you to her, by the way. I mean, Susan, she's amazing, and big thank you to her. And so the analogy I used was, so now hunger is sort of, it used to be like a bully, but now it's like a really good friend who comes and taps me on the shoulder and says, "Are you free? Are you free to have lunch? If you're busy, we can kind of reschedule, come back later." And that's what hunger is like for me now, because if I'm busy, I can say to my hunger, "No, thank you," and I'll carry on. I've got a busy work day. I've got deadlines, so I'm just going to work through lunch. I'm not going to have lunch, and then sometimes I do extended fasts, and then sort of when I am ready, when I choose to, I can break my fast, and sort of. My hunger and I, we've made peace with each other. It's like having a really good kind of catch up with a good friend.
Yeah, I absolutely love that analogy. That's probably the best way I've ever heard it put. And then the mental clarity. I don't think people understand what it's like not to feel hungry. And I don't think people understand what it's like to have mental clarity, to not get foggy, to not have their face hit their desk at 3 p.m. What kinds of things, what kinds of practical things did you I don't know, I guess appreciate more once you had that mental clarity?
Well, to my shame, I recognized that my behavior before I changed lifestyle, there was almost kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing going on, because sort of, for example, coming back from work, I'd be so hungry getting through the door that I was all really agitated before we had dinner. So my wife saw a different person before the meal to after the meal, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So I was this kind of really agitated, hangry kind of person before a meal, because I was eating all the kind of, ultra processed foods and refined carbohydrates. I was on the kind of the blood sugar roller coaster, and I recognize now that I must have had something like a mild form of reactive hypoglycemia, where my blood sugar would have shot up because of all of the refined carbohydrates I was eating. Then my insulin overcorrects and the blood sugar drops a little bit below to what my brain was comfortable with. And then, alarm bells start to go off, and then the hunger bully comes out and says, you have to eat. It doesn't matter what, you just have to eat right now or something bad's going to happen. So I recognize now that hunger and what I was eating really was affecting my mood, and actually affecting how I interacted with people I care about, and also affecting how I interact with people in my professional life, because the mental focus would come in and out. So I had these short periods close to meals when I could think clearly and focus on my work, and then I'd had that kind of feeling of I have to eat something.
So now let's skip ahead in that conversation with Aranda to hear how he likes to reframe the conversation around carbohydrates with the people that he works with. I thought this was really valuable to include as well.
So I think personalization is absolutely key, and meeting people where they are. So, for example, some of the patients that I work with, when I talk to them about low carb, what they hear is no carb, and it's not about deprivation. So over and over again, I hear people saying, I can't give up bread, or I can't give up pasta, I can't give up biscuits, or kind of insert, whatever food you want. But that's something that comes up over and over again. And then I think this is where you have to be quite gentle, and you have to really listen and empathize. And sort of one of the things I come back with when I hear that is, it's interesting to me that the way you've said what you've just said, you've said, I can't give up bread. So let's unpack that. So if you were to tell me that I can't levitate, I would believe you, because nobody can levitate. But if you were to tell me that you can't give up bread, let's think about that. What you're actually saying is, I don't want to. And that's fine. So where you are now today, if you don't want to give up bread, that's fine. Let's work with that. Let's start with that initial kind of honesty about where you are now. And if you don't want to give up bread right now today, that's fine. Let's think about reducing the amount initially, and see how you feel. And just as a self-experiment, let's try to find recipes that you really enjoy, where initially, maybe the first week, you're just trying out low carb on 1 or 2 days a week, or one of your 3 meals a day, you're having a low carb meal just to test it out. You're kind of finding recipes that you really enjoy. And let's try to find things that you love to eat that are going to support your health. So I'm never going to tell you to stop eating something that you want to eat. All I'm here for is to show you there is another way, and to show you that you can love food that you eat, and it can support your health. And a kind of an analogy I use with people is, everybody and anybody can learn how to drive, but if somebody who doesn't know how to drive gets put in a car and they're given a book to read and say, oh, here's a book, read this book for the next 20 minutes and off you go. You can drive now. That doesn't work. So there's a lot of things in life that we need support and we need to learn. But it might feel difficult at the time that we're learning, but once we've learned it, there's something that can benefit us for the rest of our life. And these lifestyle changes are no different to learning how to drive. You can absolutely do this, but it does take an investment in terms of time. It might feel unnatural at the beginning. There might be some challenges, but that's why we're here in this group, to help each other.
We are now going to go back to Gary Taubes as he closes out his thoughts with a really, I thought, funny and kind of sad story all at the same time. The question was around type 2 diabetes, which his latest book that's coming out soon will be all about. This is related to, carbohydrates and insulin as well. And I just thought this model, the way he explained it in this story, was absolutely fascinating and a really nice way to look at things.
Well, it's pretty simple. So diabetes it's an insulin disorder fundamentally. I mean, that's what type 1 diabetes is, deficiency of insulin secretion, and type 2 diabetes is this condition of insulin resistant where you end up secreting too much insulin. And you're secreting the insulin in response to the carbohydrates in the diet. So you cannot consume carbohydrates without pharmaceutical help to metabolize them safely. If you suffer from type 1 diabetes, you have to take insulin to eat carbohydrates, and they tell you to take carbohydrates, so you cover the insulin. And if you're have type 2 diabetes, you have to take either blood sugar lowering medications or insulin. So we got to this point in America, in the world, where by the early 1970s, the prescribed diet for diabetes from the American Diabetes Association was to tell patients to get 60% of their calories from the one macronutrient that they couldn't metabolize safely without drug therapy. And there had always, it's fascinating. When my book, The Case Against Sugar, came out, or maybe it was A Case for Keto, I can't remember which one. I think it was A Case for Keto. I was interviewed by a reporter for a diabetes website that's based out of Israel. And he was a former chef who became a journalist who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And he told me this story of being diagnosed. Doesn't know anything about this other than that he's now got to take insulin for when he eats carbohydrates. And he says to his physician, who's very well-meaning and very thoughtful, and he said, wait, I don't get it. What you're telling me is that carbohydrates are now a poison to me, and insulin is the antidote. And I'm supposed to eat the poison and take the antidote every day, as opposed to just not eating the poison. And the doctor says, no, you can't think of it like that. And he goes, but that's true, isn't it? And the doctor says, well, yes, but you're not going to want to go through life not eating the poison. And I end up using this conversation as an epigraph, the initial quote in the book, because it nails it so perfectly.
We are now going to go back to Dr. Andrew Oswari, who we heard from earlier in this interview, as he talks about how quickly some of the health conditions that he was experiencing started to clear up and what this meant for him in his personal life and his family life, and also what this meant for his practice. These last two clips that I'm going to play are really about the stories of people in this field who have been trained in a certain way and have been told that you need to have carbohydrates, you need to have whole grains, you need to have fruits and vegetables in the diet, and trying that advice over and over and over and getting so super frustrated that the advice just wasn't working. And I just really want you to pay attention to this perspective of a guy who is really burned out, dealing with lots and lots of health issues. Like we explained before, that carbohydrates and insulin are not just related to type 2 diabetes and obesity. There's so many different conditions here. So I want you to hear his experience and starting to feel better. And I really want you to pay attention to what his day-to-day is like, how much more excited he is to go to work and help people. I think this is absolutely wonderful. So in the 2-week transition period, you switch over. At the end of the 2 weeks, were you pretty much out of the woods as far as the diabetes goes, or was that still kind of an ongoing thing that you had to deal with?
I just remember at that 2-week spot, I was like, I read 3 books that week. I found 3 podcasts. I signed up for the Nutrition Network. I mean, I was just trying to get as much information as possible. And I just forgot about my diabetes, honestly. I forgot about it. I felt so good. And I checked it, my A1C about 3 months later, and I believe it was 6.6.
Wow. That's so cool. It's nice to just forget about something because you're feeling great and so ultra motivated. In the introduction, we talked about, I'll read this again, headaches, reflux, irritable bowel syndrome, hypertension, knee pain, brain fog, 70 pounds lost. Those were just like side effects of your change. How soon did you start noticing those things go away? And was that surprising to you?
It literally was 2 weeks for me. I mean, I know I'm a lucky one for sure. Irritable bowel, man, I thought that was my life. I really thought I grew up with irritable bowel. I thought that was here to stay. And when that was gone, that's when I really started figuring out, like, hey, my headaches are gone. Hey, I'm thinking clearly. Hey, I'm not fatigued anymore. Hey, I'm not as irritable as I was before. I always keep saying that 2 weeks because that's when it turned around for me.
All of it.
Yeah. It was crazy. It was crazy.
That's amazing.
I remember walking downstairs. When I wake up, I used to wake up, I would walk down the stairs. And if I ever had a really good day, which to me was like going down the stairs and I didn't think about my knees. I was like, geez, this is a great day.
Wow.
And now it's that way every day.
Wow. All right, man, we're going back to your Twitter account. So I literally, you start Twitter because you don't know much about it or how to use it. I saw like a baseball post about the Yankees or something, and like a few other little things here and there. It goes dark in 2015. There's really nothing between 2015 and 2019. And you had maybe, again, done like, I don't know, 50 to 100 tweets ever. And then all of a sudden, your Twitter account is blowing up. You are posting and posting and posting and posting, and it's all about your profession. And you can just tell you are lit up, so excited. Can you tell us why it was important for you to share your message?
I think the majority of my tweets now are because of patients that have changed their own life. To me, there's nothing more encouraging than to hear these success stories of folks who've done it. Even like today, that I had a guy, he came to me for foot pain 3 months ago. And I looked at him and I said, boy, in my mind, there's a lot of visceral fat here. So we do a little quick low LCA, low carb, high fat discussion. I see him in follow up a couple of weeks later. I can tell his gut has already decreased. The rotundness has already calmed down. And today, I had to stop his blood pressure medicine that he'd been on for the last 5 years. Now that jazzes me more than anything. I remember just maintaining disease, and now things are actually turning around. Things that I never thought I could do, that could happen. Because I had seen people came to me for acupuncture and complementary alternative medicine, integrative medicine to help get them off their blood pressure medicines. but it wasn't happening. I tried, and I told them, I would say, the blood pressure medicine is safer than you not being on the blood pressure medicine at this time. But now I've had patients come off the blood pressure medicine, and it astounds me. Every time that happens, I'm just shocked.
Wow.
I'm overjoyed, but I'm shocked.
Wow. And that was starting in 2019. After fixing yourself, you start fixing patients, and it seems like more often than not, they're not just like maintaining, they're getting better. They're restoring their health. They're reversing disease. That's what you've seen?
Yeah. And I love it. That's what gives me excitement anymore. That's it right there. Just trying to heal as many people as we get in contact with.
This is February 6th of 2021. Andrew Soare, MD, Twitter tweet. For 49 years, I couldn't wait to retire. Then I found my passion. Now I can't wait to see the future. What's more amazing? My wife shares my passion. Can't be more blessed. Wow.
Yeah, that's it. That's right. Jane, Jane's my wife, and I don't know if I could have done this without her. She's lost 40 on her own. She's gotten off her blood pressure medicine on her own. Her blood pressure shocked us one time. It was 180 over 110. And
wow.
Yeah, she had lost, I think she had lost about 20 pounds when we took the blood pressure again, and it was normal. Oh, no, wait. It was 20 pounds, took the blood pressure, it was still high. And she was still on medication. It was still high. About 2 weeks later, something just clicked in her body and the blood pressure was normal.
Our last clip, as I explained earlier, is going to be a practitioner who practiced medicine in a certain way, and once she found low carbohydrate, she got to practice in a different way. And again, we're kind of past all the science that we explained earlier about carbohydrates and insulin and all those other things. I just thought it was so important to stick these stories at the very end so you can see what it's like for somebody that is getting into the medical profession, really trying to help people, becoming completely unsuccessful, and then finding low carbohydrate and completely changing their careers. And I just want you to hear these stories and how wonderful they are. You can hear with Amanda how incredibly frustrated she was and how happy she is now and how happy she is to put in extra time and energy at work and how she's really changing lives. So let's go hear Amanda Decker, and this is from episode 161 of Boundless Body Radio. What was it like? Like, how did you feel when the first patients started coming in and they started seeing improvements after, being in practice for 12 years? What was that like to see that?
I definitely remember the first time that I actually got to take someone's medicine away, and I was blown away. I was like, I've never removed a medicine that I started for a chronic disease, but you obviously need it because your blood sugars are normal. You don't need this anymore. And it was almost like a high. It was a good natural high of, wait, I can really help people get better, and they don't have to live with that disease anymore. To give them the power to say, I have this condition, but it's not me, and it doesn't have to be me in the future, and I can fix that. It reinvigorated my practice and made me want to keep going, and has made me want to continue to grow my practice and take bigger steps and leaps of faith to do that.
That's so cool. I'm doing a happy dance over here. Like, it just sounds like so much fun to be able to see these outcomes. I'm curious too, like, was there anybody that you can really remember that didn't take a really good crack at this and didn't see improvements?
So you mean that they really went all in, they did everything that I said and didn't see improvements whatsoever?
Yeah. Have you ever seen anybody like really try and just like fail? It didn't work.
Not completely. No. Now I have, let's see, how's the best way to answer this? So there are some people who their metabolic health is in such a state that it's going to take more than a minute for them to kind of turn it around and see improvements. So they might have to make the changes and live in those changes for several months before they really kind of start to see it. And part of that is, coaching the patient to not quit, not give up. I have a patient recently who's kind of a good example of this. A gentleman came in because he's already had one leg amputated. He's not diabetic, but he has peripheral vascular disease. one leg amputated. The other leg looked like it needed to be amputated. I mean, the leg looked scary, had a wound on it, multiple wounds on it, oozing red. I couldn't feel pulses in it, but he was sitting here by his orthopedist because he needed a knee replacement in his leg, and he couldn't because he was too obese to have the knee replacement. He hadn't weighed in a long time. He weighed over 400 pounds. I don't exactly remember how much he weighed, but we took waist. I always take waist measurements, neck measurements, things like that when they come in. And he was practicing a juicing diet, more of a vegetarian-based diet at the time. And I was like, well, this is not serving you. Let's change it. And he said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I've got to get better. If I don't, I'm going to lose this leg. And I can't walk right now because I can't get my knee replacement, and I need to lose this leg. He was it was a hot mess basically. And he knew it. And he's like, I'm desperate. I was like, well, go keto. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I want you to go keto. We got to get weight off of you. We got to get it off now. So 6 weeks later, he hadn't lost a pound, hadn't lost a single pound. He's like, I'm so frustrated. I don't understand. I'm doing everything that you're telling me, and I sleep better, and my clothes fit better, and my leg looks better. I'm down to 1 wound instead of 4 wounds, and I can now feel pulses in the bottom of your foot. He lost 5.5 inches around his waist, Casey.
Wow.
How this happened. I don't know why the pounds didn't come off. The 5.5 inches, and he sleeps better, and his clothes fit better, and his leg has shown improvement in just 6 weeks. So to answer that question, that's a long roundabout thing, but no, I have not seen anyone who has done everything that I say and had absolutely no improvements. It may not be the improvements that they think they're going to have right off the bat. It may not be the improvements that they are wanting right off the bat, but there are improvements there if they're doing it.
Wow, that's so amazing. What a cool story. I mean, if you had a pill that could do, it would improve your life somehow, maybe not as much as you think, maybe more than you could ever consider or imagine, like everybody would take it. It'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. And for the listener, like if you have not seen a diabetic leg, oh my goodness, you can't unsee that. If you've watched Vinnie Tortorich's documentary Fat, talking to Dr. Gary Fettke, and they show a scene and you can't like cringe away fast enough because it's like happening. And it is some of the gnarliest scene. It's one of the gnarliest scenes I've ever seen in my life. So if that alone doesn't scare you into changing some of your habits, yes, so scary. I'm curious to hear it doesn't have to be like a major one, but just the first one that comes ahead. Some of your other favorite stories from people that have really changed their lives.
Yeah. So actually I wrote down a couple before this podcast because I think stories make it so much more real. But I have a lady, she's 74 years old. She has diabetes. She's had diabetes 30, 40 years. Before I was her primary care, but like probably 15, 20 years ago, she had a different primary care, and she had done a low carb diet and had gotten herself off of her insulin, off of all of her treatments that she was on at that time for her diabetes. And her doctor told her at that time, you have to quit this diet or you're going to have a heart attack. You're going to kill yourself. The fear mongering that was there. The woman had just gotten herself off of all of her insulin and all of her diabetes medicine. But because this provider who was not very well educated on this, and I get it, 15, 20 years ago, there was even more fear about keto than there is now. So she quit the diet. Guess what? She ended up right back on all of her insulin, all of her other stuff. In that meantime, she also she was in a car accident and had a traumatic brain injury. And so she has some memory loss, some balance issues, and some things related to that. Well, I had been seeing her for a couple of years, and she's like, Amanda, I'm just frustrated. I don't want to be diabetic anymore. I hate taking all this insulin. I hate taking all this medicine. I don't feel good. And I was like, well, why don't you try keto? She goes, well, I did that, and my doctor told me I was going to kill myself. I was like, but you're not. It's like, just go do it back again. So within a month, she was off her insulin again. She was off 3 of her other meds. She's lost 27 pounds, but she's also seen cognition improvement. She's like, I can recall things that I couldn't recall before. I'm not as anxious, and my kids tell me that I have a more clear brain and I'm not as snippy with them. All because she went back on this keto diet. I'm like, man, had she not ever been taken off of it and had this traumatic brain injury, would she have even had all of these issues to deal with, because, ketones are also a alternate fuel for the brain. And when you go through a traumatic brain injury, that brain injury is using all of that sugar. So you got to feed it with something, and feed it with ketones. So yeah, her story just blows me away, because yes, she's had diabetes for a long time, but just by changing her diet, she's been able to get off all of her insulin and almost all of her other medicines, even though she's been diabetic for years.
Wow. Think about that in the context of quality of life, not just for her, but for all of her loved ones that would have had to take care of, a cognitively declining parent. Like, that's so hard. What an amazing thing to add so much quality of life to somebody, in their declining years. That's so cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. All right. So let's talk about Bruce, because Bruce is right now my poster child. And I don't know if you've seen me on Twitter or not, but I've been posting about Bruce, and there's pictures of him. He's given me permissions to share that. So Bruce is 59 years old. He has congestive heart failure, and is on a lot of medicines. His cardiologist referred him to me for weight management, because he said, we've maximized. You're on every amount of fluid pill that I can give you. There's nothing else I can do unless you lose weight. It's just a steady decline until you die. So this is what you got. So he came to see me, and I remember leaving that first visit, looking at my nurse and saying, I don't think this is going to work. I don't feel like he's into it. I think he thinks he's too far gone. I don't know that he wants to change. It's like, I don't get the good vibe that this is going to be the hit patient. And he would probably tell you the same thing, because he kind of looked at me and said, okay, afterwards. So that was in November of 2020. I am happy to report that Bruce is now down 99 pounds since November of 2020. He is off 3 of his diuretic medicines. He's had to buy multiple sets of new clothes, and he can breathe. That first visit, when he came to see me, he could not walk from my lobby to my exam room, which is all a flat surface and wasn't very far of a distance, without having to stop because he was short of breath. He told me that last month, you get a little emotional with this, last month, he met his high school classmates on our downtown Dixon. And he's like, I could walk Main Street up and down that hill, and I wasn't short of breath, and I didn't have to stop.
That.
I mean, that's the stuff that makes me happy. That's the stuff that makes me come back to work every day, that makes me want to stay late and finish my charts and do whatever, because Bruce has changed. Bruce is going to live longer. Bruce is happier. Bruce can breathe. I mean, man couldn't breathe before, and now he can breathe. And so, it amazes me, but it also still makes me so mad, because earlier in my career, there's so many of my patients who died because I didn't know what to tell them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bruce, we love you, man. We're so proud of you. Awesome. So proud of you for deciding to make a change. That is amazing. So thank you for your example to the rest of us. Yeah. And thank you, Amanda. I mean, those are amazing stories. These are people. Yeah. These people have families and lives, and there are neighbors and friends and family. And it's so impactful.
Yeah. I mean, these are everyday people. These are not people who have unlimited amount of wealth. We live in a small rural town. If these people can do it, anybody can do it. You just have to put your mind to it and don't overcomplicate it.
Wow. That's so amazing. We are going to add in one final clip here. This is going back to Amy Berger with exclusive content with her recommendations around carbohydrates. I thought this would be really nice to throw at the end of this episode. Making recommendations around the macronutrients can be a little bit challenging. We started with protein as our very first episode of the Premium Podcast. With protein, I really like to stick with the recommendation you heard over and over again. Really are looking for somewhere in the ballpark of 1 gram per pound of your ideal body weight. So if you're at your ideal body weight, try to eat your weight in pounds in grams of protein every single day. If you are 400 pounds and would feel ideal at 200 pounds, that might be a really nice target for you as well. Carbohydrates, for the most part, I really like to recommend that you start with the lowest amount of carbohydrates that you can tolerate, that you can get by on, and then adjust as needed. So it doesn't mean you can't ever eat carbohydrates for the rest of your life, even though it is non-essential, which Amy's going to talk about here. You can survive without them, but I do try to limit them as much as possible. I think for most people, somewhere between between 50 and 150 grams of carbohydrate a day is somewhere in the proper range. Fat is a little bit more tricky to recommend. We're going to cover that in the next episode of the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. And I think of fat more as a lever, something you can increase or decrease depending on what's going on. And different people have different needs. And so for me to make a specific fat recommendation, it is really challenging. We really try to encourage people to experiment with themselves, see how they feel on more or less fat, and see how their results are going. It certainly is the case that if you are eating a very high amount of fat in the diet and you're trying to lose weight, that might not work because you're still taking in too much of that energy in the body, where the body already has its own endogenous fat that it wants to burn off. So just a quick side note there to talk about recommendations and how difficult it can be to make them. But I think the carbohydrate one is really nice. And so let's hear this clip from Amy Berger. Generally speaking, like what kind of advice would you give to most people that you work with when it comes to carbohydrates, especially related to your book, End Your Carb Confusion? What are some of the things that help people practically when they're thinking about how to consume carbohydrates in their diet?
Well, of course, I specialize in low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets. So most people coming to me are either already eating very little carbohydrate or they want to adopt that kind of way of eating. So, and so I help people with obesity, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, metabolic syndrome, all that stuff. So most of those people do really well on a very low carb diet. And so the kinds of carbohydrate they would eat would be the ones that are the least likely to really elevate blood sugar and insulin. So things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, mushrooms, lettuce, these, we don't typically think of lettuce as a carbohydrate, but it is. Like if you hear the word carbs or carbohydrate, you kind of automatically think of bread and pasta and rice and potatoes, but all vegetables are carbohydrate. They just happen to not have a lot of starch. And same thing with fruit. Fruit is a carbohydrate, and it's everybody's carbohydrate tolerance differs. And that's exactly what our book is about, End Your Carb Confusion. Some people can have lots of starch and even, a little bit of sugar in their diet, and they're fine. They're healthy, they're lean, they feel well. For other people, they have to go really low. So most of the people who come to me, like I said, the carbs they're going to eat are going to be the non-starchy vegetables. And maybe, there's trace amounts of carbohydrate in certain dairy products, and some people can tolerate a small amount of berries. But beyond that general principle of just lower carb, then everyone has to individualize for themselves.
Gotcha. And you guys in your book, you talk about 3 different levels that kind of correspond to the tolerance for people in carbohydrates. Can you talk a little bit about those 3 different levels?
Yeah, the lowest level is 20 total grams of carbohydrate per day. So it's really low. It is based on Dr. Westman's 20 years of clinical experience as a physician. And that is intended to be a ketogenic diet. That's very low. It's low enough that just about everybody who eats that low a level of carbohydrate is going to be in ketosis. And not everybody needs that, though. The next level up is 50 total grams, which is still a very low carb diet, in my opinion. Some people will be in ketosis eating that much carbohydrate, some won't. And then the third level is 150 grams. That's really for much more active people that are already lean, people that don't have any health problems. But we actually do recommend that even if you don't have any health issues or you're not overweight, you might experiment for a few weeks or months, starting at phase 1, which is that lowest ketogenic 20 total grams, because you might just feel better than you've ever felt. You might think you're doing really well until you feel even better. So we actually recommend, it's not required, but we recommend that people start lower, see how they do, and then they can increase if they want to. But there are certain, I think, effects that you will get at that level, that super low carb intake that you're not going to get at a higher level. So it's worth trying. It's worth experimenting with.
Yeah, that's right. So in your experience, taking as many people through this process as you have in your career, I would like to know, first of all, do you know of many, or I would say even any instances where you didn't get the desired outcome that the person wanted, first of all? And then the second question is, what do you notice about people that say like, I could never go without my favorite bread. I could never go without rice every dinner. I love the cookie store down the street and I have to wash it down with a bucket of soda. Like, what do you tell those people?
Wow, lots of different things. So the first question, generally, if people aren't getting the results they want, we really just have to make a change somewhere. We have to tweak something. We have to personalize it in some way for them. Just because a particular food is low in carbohydrate, somebody still might have a sensitivity to it, or somebody still might react to it in a way that it's not the best thing for them to eat. I also see, specifically with weight loss, I think there's a lot of undiagnosed and improperly treated hypothyroidism out there. So even when somebody's doing the diet really well, they might still struggle to lose weight if they have like a genuine hormonal imbalance that's getting in the way. And also, just I will say, I've had clients whom I recommended to eat more carbohydrate. Like we said earlier, super strict keto is not the best for everybody. Everybody can eat a ketogenic diet. Not everybody needs to, and not everybody feels their best that way.
So important.
Yeah. Now, with regard to what was
for the people who like they just
right.
can't fathom their life without carbohydrates.
Yeah, that depends on the situation. If somebody has type 2 diabetes or non-alcoholic fatty liver or, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, are you really willing to trade that for a donut or a cookie? Like you want to risk limb amputation, blindness, kidney dialysis, heart attack, early death. You really, that cookie is so delicious that it's worth you potentially losing a leg, potentially going blind, potentially being on dialysis, and making your family pick up the slack if you can no longer care for yourself. Like, oh, that's fair. I mean, that's a really harsh answer, but that's one. The two other ways to look at this is, for most people, not everybody, but most people, if they just give it 30 days, give it a month, most people really do find they don't miss those foods as much as they thought they would. They really don't. The sugar cravings do go away. The carb cravings do go away. And they start to feel so good without those foods that they don't want to go back. They said, I'm never going back. Why would I eat those foods that had me feeling so awful when I feel so good now? So that's another perspective. And then the other one is, you have to know how you're wired, but you could do very low carb or keto, 92% of the time. And once every 6 weeks, you do go to the cookie shop. Once, at Christmas, you do enjoy grandma's pie or whatever the thing is. You really can have these things on occasion, as long as you go right back to your normal lower carb diet. The issue with that is the slippery slope thing. There are some people who can have one cookie or one donut or even a whole meal. That's how, go to your favorite Mexican place and you eat the chips and you eat the rice and beans. And then they get right back on plan. For other people, that one meal leads to an 8-week bender and they regain 15 pounds. The type 2 diabetes comes back. So sometimes that gets somebody's foot in the door. Hey, you don't have to give this up forever. Let's just see what happens for 30 days. And then they have the option of either, well, I don't want to eat that stuff ever again anyway, or, okay, I feel really great doing this keto low carb diet, but I'm going to have my thing once in a great while.
I love that. I think that's wonderful advice. And I think what you said about knowing yourself is so important. I always thought I could moderate, and it turns out I really can't. I have to abstain. I just have to stay away. I don't have a choice. And it is interesting too. Like, I've got a client who had tremendous results with low carb and then fasting, and he lost a bunch of weight. His strength went up. He took a trip, overseas and let his diet go. And this was 4 years ago, and he has not recovered to this day. He gained all the weight back and then some. He struggles with all kinds of different health issues, and it's a real bummer to see. And it was like, yeah, you should go on this trip and you should go enjoy yourself and you should go and eat all these foods. But what if that's the thing that sends you back down the path you don't want to be?
That's exactly why it is a slippery slope, and you have to know how you're wired to whether that's safe for you to do, to have that little excursion every now and then, or whether you're better off never doing that.
Yeah, totally. Well, this has been super informative. We really appreciate your contribution to this. If you don't mind, tell the listener where they can go to find you and connect with you and your amazing work.
Sure. My handle on most social media is Tuit Nutrition, TUIT Nutrition. That's my Twitter. That's my YouTube. My books. I do have a website, tuitnutrition.com, but it's in desperate need of overhaul, but you can contact me through there. My books you can find on Amazon. It's the End Your Carb Confusion, The Stall Slayer, which is about breaking fat loss stalls on low carb diets. And my first book, The Alzheimer's Antidote, about Alzheimer's disease.
That's awesome. Well, we will link to all of that. Thank you, as always, so very much for that informative conversation.
Thank you.
And that is a wrap for this episode of the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast, all about carbohydrates. As we did in the first one, I just wanted to end with my thoughts on all of this. This has been a lot of work, but really awesome to go back and listen to some of these conversations that I had quite a while ago, and remember all of the different lives that have been changed with this work. When I reflect on my own career and doing personal training, we were told that people had to have, again, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains. You had to have meals and snacks and do all these meal plans and complex recipes. And I just really thought that people were not very good at following the advice. I thought that, they would listen to us tell them all the right things to do, and that they would just go off and eat cheeseburgers or whatever. And I look back at my own life, and when I was, racing road bikes and eating tons of carbohydrates, my energy was just absolutely terrible. I was hungry all the time. I needed to have a snack ready to go between clients because I couldn't just go and enjoy my life. Whenever I would race road bikes, my stomach would always hurt because of all the sugar and nasty sugary products that I would have to consume just to keep my energy up. And it was through my work with metabolic carts, where I was actually measuring people's metabolic rates and metabolism, that I actually learned over time that you could alter somebody's metabolism by changing their diet, not only changing the way that people trained and telling them to back off the way we learned with Dr. Phil Maffetone in this episode, but also by changing the fuel source. When we start to limit the carbohydrates in the diet, we then teach the body that there are hundreds and thousands of calories of fat in most people. Most people that you see walking around that have a certain amount of body fat percentage literally can have 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 calories of energy in the form of stored fat. And they're just dragging it along with them everywhere they go. And they want to lose weight. They want to lose the fat. And the body doesn't want to carry around that much fat either. And in the state where insulin is always super high, the body just thinks it is always in summer mode, in storage mode. And it never really gets to this winter where it can really unlock and burn off all of that fat. And when we, like I said, limit the carbohydrates in our diet, whatever strategies that we find to be able to do that, once we do that, the body is more than willing to burn off that fat. And I saw remarkable results. It was first with myself. When I was mixing in more fat and eliminating the carbohydrates, my energy was so much better. My hunger was totally different. I didn't need meals and snacks to the same degree that I needed before. I could do workouts in a fasted state. My performance improved. I got better. I was able to do longer endurance, rides. I wasn't competing anymore, but I literally got faster on my bike when I cut them out. I got even more benefit when I went fully carnivore, which we'll talk about in a future episode. But then it wasn't only in myself that I saw all of these wonderful benefits. It was my clients, the people that have been coming to me, hiring me to help them lose weight, to help them lose fat. And we were unsuccessful for so many years. But once we tried this one thing and getting all of these people off of the carbohydrates and onto things like proteins and fats that come from animals, people got amazing results. And it made my work so much more enjoyable and enriching that I was actually helping people improve their lives. People were telling me that, not only were they losing weight, but they were feeling better. Their mental clarity was so much better. People in their families were following their advice. Their kids' behavior was so much better. And I just think for this one macronutrient, this one major group of food that we're talking about today, carbohydrates are the absolutely only one that are not essential. If you walk away from this conversation and decide that you will never have another carbohydrate for the rest of your life, you will be just fine. You will continue living. And that is not the same with protein, and that is not the same with fat, which we will be covering in our next episode of the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. Thank you so very much for listening to this special episode taken from the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. If you haven't already, please follow our show on Apple Podcasts and be sure to leave us a rating and review on that platform, as it is the best way to continue to get our message out to new people all over the world. And as we said in the introduction, feel free to book a 30-minute complimentary session with us on our website at myboundlessbody.com so we can discuss your health and fitness goals and help you come up with a plan. Thank you so very much, as always, for listening to Boundless Body Radio.